Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics, brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the co-owner and comics sommelier of Variant Edition, a comic shop in Edmonton, Alberta. It's Brandon Schatz. Thanks for coming on, Brandon.
Hey, thank you for having me.
So we're going to get into a lot of different places involving what's, the history of your shop, what you're doing right now, but I just want to start with one very important question. What is a comic sommelier? This is on your about section, so I'm stealing
it. Absolutely. It's a very weird term that kind of came about organically with some customers who basically had come in and said that I was really good at pairing their tastes with a comic.
Ah, just like their favorite fine wine.
Exactly, and one of them was just like, "Oh, you're like a comic sommelier," and I was like, this needs to be a thing.
It is.
Makes me very excited.
I mean, it makes a lot of sense because it's, one of my favorite things. I love talking to retailers because, like, I had John Hendrick on the podcast a long time ago, and I remember I tested his abilities to, give him like a book I like, a movie I like, TV show I like, et cetera, and see what he comes up with. And without even knowing it, he recommended to me one of my favorite comics ever. And
that's awesome.
That's like the comic sommelier thing. It's like if somebody's like, oh, what's a comic I would like? I feel like if you really know what you're doing, like if you got that sommelier vibe, all you need is a few things and then you can come up with something great for someone.
We used to play a game in store and online called Pick 3. And the only rule was you had to pick 3 of anything that didn't have to do with comics. It could be music, it could be TV shows, movies, books, and we would come up with a book for you.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a few people who would sort of like kind of jokingly test that. And I think one of my favorite ones was Sesame Street, and I forget what one of them was, and Two Girls and a Cup.
Oh, Jesus.
And I spat out Satellite Sam, and it was like, boom, walked away.
That is incredible. I feel like you need to create like a discoverability tool that uses the pick 3 thing. It's like insert these 3, covers the pro. You can have like some sort of algorithm that figures out exactly what like the perfect recommendation would be. I feel like there's something here. Comic publishers, work on this. But anyways, well, let's jump into the history of your shop because I'm really curious about the origin story of Variant Edition, especially one very specific element. You opened on Free Comic Book Day 2015, I believe?
Absolutely.
Are you crazy?
Yeah, a little bit. So there was an opportunity that I kind of had come up to write a lot more and get paid for it, and then it kind of dropped away. I was working at a comic store at the time, and I was like, you know what, this is a good time to walk away because I was getting disenfranchised with sort of like the way that they were running things. And when the freelance kind of disappeared before it started, I just sort of thought like, wow, I really miss doing what I used to do and selling comics. And so we decided to open the store and kind of went and pushed for Free Comic Book Day. Now, like, I know why you're saying that is because it's in the middle of the Marvel Secret Wars stuff and Convergence, probably one of the worst times to try and launch a store ever.
Well, and also just Free Comic. The funny thing is I was weighing whether or not launching on Free Comic Book Day would be a genius move or a crazy move because it brings in it theoretically brings in a lot of traffic, which can be a good thing or it can be it's like a double-edged sword depending on how prepared you are.
Yeah. So for us, it was a little bit of both. It was a new store in the city, and so people were checking them out. But because it was a new store in the city, it was a little more sparse than what people were used to. Our city also has, I think I counted it out the other day, 12 shops.
Wow.
10 that do new comics for sure, and 2 that just do old comics. So per capita, we are stacked, and we were then even more so because a couple have dropped off, and now it's 12.
Mm-hmm.
But quite honestly, and this is where I get into the the pitch part of the brain. The city really needed a different flavor.
Sure. I mean, I like one of the funny things is a lot of times people who write or podcast or whatever about comics, they want to make comics. I have no interest in that. I've always wanted to open my own shop, and part of it is that I've grown up in the same. I've like lived almost my entire life in the same place, and through the totality of that, besides one like temporary contender that joined, I've only dealt with one flavor of shop, and I love it. But at the same time, it's just like sometimes you need a different shop to bring a different flavor, and that's one of the things I think is really interesting about what you and Danica have done is I know that. You know, your shop is certainly different than the stereotype. It's certainly different than, like, you know, a great example is that you write the retailer's view on the beat, and on the beat is also Tilting at Windmills, which is Brian Hibbs' shop. And you guys, while you have a lot of similar ethos, there's a big overlap because you both kind of have the bookstore mentality. You definitely don't have the traditionalist mentality that a lot of shops do. So I'm curious, like, what was the kind of shop you wanted to make when you knew you were going to jump into this?
I'm going to tangent slightly before this because Brian Hibbs joined Comics Beat when CBR went through their big ownership change.
Right. So you were there first.
And we actually got a call from Brian Hibbs, which I almost answered with like, "What do you want?" Because it was the area code for Yelp.
Oh.
And I'm thankful to this day that I wasn't just like started off with just like, "What?"
Yeah.
Because we had told them forever, just like, leave us alone.
Right.
But he was very kind and stated like, hey, he was moving over and even asked, is it okay? And I was like, are you kidding? One of the reasons why I do this is because you did it.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we don't agree on much, but that's actually
a good thing.
Exactly. And one of the things that he specifically expressed an interest in. There needs to be more people and more opinions out there. And also like best wishes to Brian Hibbs.
Oh yeah,
of course.
Absolutely.
But yeah, and in terms of sort of our mentality and approach, and even in writing those things, sometimes it gets a little hard because we're not a traditionalist mindset. And I honestly had to stop reading the comments, half because I would waste my day being like, and another thing.
Yeah.
And the other half was because it hurt, because I don't think anybody goes into this, and especially spends the amount of time that they do writing articles like this, thinking like, yes, what I really want to do is destroy everything.
Oh, yeah.
And I know you get that too from some people too, where they're just like, this opinion doesn't line up with my thing, so like you're clearly trying to burn everything down. Like, no, that's not how comics works in general.
Yeah, I mean, I just wrote an article about crowdfunding in which I wrote about Comicsgate and Indiegogo. So yeah, I had a lot of that lately.
Yeah,
I had some very entertaining emails, but yeah, I mean, I guess like to boil it down though, for listeners that don't know, typically the idea with comic shops is that they're normally like single issue comic focused. And I am kind of curious, speaking to that mix, that product mix that like most shops have, I would say that like most are probably pretty close to 50-50 on single issues and graphic novels at this point. It really depends on the shop, but I bet you average out about there. For you, like, what is the product mix? Do you lean towards graphic novels?
Absolutely. So you'd probably be a little more shocked to learn that like the mix generally for most stores probably isn't close to 50-50.
Really? Well, I mean, if you average them all out, because there's some that are probably way, like I know shops that are completely, like literally only single issues. I've been to them and they're insane to me.
Yeah, well, and this might be where more of my mindset is coming from, is in the city, out of all of those stores, there's probably two that focus on graphic novels, and one that literally just has everything because they can.
Right.
But that, of course, has also changed very recently as well.
Mm-hmm.
And really kind of when I look at our store mix, it comes back to one of the reasons why I started the store. was looking at the industry. This was even like 6 years ago now,
Mm-hmm.
and looking at the trajectory and thinking like, well, clearly, like graphic novels are in the mix. This is how kids are growing up, especially, and of course, it's become more pronounced, and focusing more in a direction where trends are going. It's weird to me to see people point to, say, charts where you'll see this growth in graphic novels year over year over year, and some stagnation, or at the very least, if you kind of average out the amount of SKUs or titles and kind of divide it out amongst the single issues and realize that there's actually a decline for all of them. And it's been happening for a long time despite growth in money.
Mm-hmm. I should about for single issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And just the way that they're priced, like there's a similar trend with graphic novels because there's more graphic novels, but the trajectory is completely different and the money involved is completely different.
Mm-hmm.
It just seems weird to me that traditionalists tend to discount that and just be like, well, no, this is a result of people abandoning this, and not publishers are abandoning the single issue format. They're abandoning the comic book stores. No, like cause and effect is mixed up here. The cause is the lower sales. The effect is people going to graphic novels, or the distributors or publishers going to graphic novels, because that's where the market is.
Mm-hmm.
That's how a business runs.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it is really interesting. I think there's a lot of like mix up between the signal and the noise with all this stuff, but it is really interesting. I remember the funny thing is when I was really like kind of looking into setting up my shop, I stopped doing that for quite some time because I live in Alaska, and Alaska has been going through a prolonged, I'm going to say recession, but I don't know if that covers it. Mm-hmm. Let's just say the economy is not great. And one of the things I remember talking to somebody who worked for a publisher, and I said that I actually was not intending to make single issues like a significant focus at all. And I remember them telling me basically like I would need to have a lot more of a lot more of that than I would expect, because I would need that for cash flow, because like trade paperbacks and graphic novels are just more unpredictable. And I don't know. I mean, I do think it's interesting because most of the shops that I feel like have done the best during the pandemic have been the ones that almost have a bookstore type mentality to them. Mm-hmm. And I think that's interesting. Like, I don't, the thing about comic shops is I don't think there's any one answer that's right. I think you have to do the best shop for yourself. And I think you have to look at what's next. And I think that was smart of you, is like when you were thinking about what variant edition was going to be, you were trying to forecast out what the future looks like. But I do think it's interesting where it's like, there sometimes can be assumed, like, it's like, you have to do this because that's where the money has always been. But I don't know if that's where the money will always be, if that makes sense.
100%. I've always seen the direct market's stance on, you need to support us because we're the reason why you're here. It would be akin to Marvel being like, hey, you need to buy more X-Men because they were extremely popular and that's how you made money. And like, no, that's not how it works.
Right.
It's how, when it's beneficial for you type of thing, when you're a business, and this weird disconnect that I find with comic stores, where they look at like, well, I run a business and I make the decisions that make the most sense for me. And then turning around and pointing at the comic book store or the comic book publishers and going like, hey, why are you making these decisions? As though it's just a completely foreign idea that maybe the direction that things need to be going is not yours.
Right.
And it really sucks and whatnot. But like, the part of business is pivoting when things change.
Yeah. Or at least like adjusting to the new reality. Because it's like, the old reality isn't going to be gone. It will be retrofitted with other parts that make it a little bit more interesting. But I did want to ask too about, we're talking about the graphic novels as a big difference, or at least in terms of your focus. But I do think it's interesting that, like I mentioned the pandemic. And one of the things that really came up during that was when many cities went under shelter in place, they started having to do things that they didn't do before. Like, for example, like one of my favorites is Katie Proctor and Books with Pictures. Katie Proctor was doing personal shopping, which I think was rad, and delivery and all this different stuff. And one thing I thought was interesting is you actually already did delivery before the pandemic.
Absolutely.
So that's been a long time part of what you did.
Yeah, so it really started out with the idea that some people are just low mobility, full stop. And it seemed weird to not try and serve that audience. And when that kind of picked up and kicked off, we expanded it to people who are low on time. Right. And, you kind of, for low mobility, we do a lot lower cost because it seems... and for one time a month, it's just entirely free, depending on their delivery levels. Right. But it just seems super weird to charge them because of their circumstance.
Yeah, you don't want to be punitive because of their circumstances.
Exactly, but someone who is low on time is usually low on time because they're fine. To certain extents, because like obviously a lot of people have a couple of jobs even just to make ends meet because of the way things are. But the idea that we can provide access for circumstance, that was a huge part of our business. And so when the pandemic hit and all this stuff happened, we just sort of adjusted our rates because suddenly, in our minds anyways, people had to be more low mobility.
Yeah.
Not in terms of disability in any sense, but just because of circumstance.
No, I mean, that makes total sense. I mean, the shelter in place turns everyone into low mobility.
Exactly.
And it was good though, because I mean, the interesting thing is I mean, it's not like you would have ever expected this, but it made you kind of uniquely suited to be able to handle that situation, I imagine, because you already had that infrastructure set up, basically.
Absolutely. Like there was a couple things that kind of made us uniquely suited. One of them weirdly came from, when you kind of start a comic store, you're working other jobs to just sort of like make that aspect work without kind of pulling money from the business, small business in general. And Danica was working for an insolvency firm as administration. And one of the weird things that people might not know about insolvency firms is there's like a weird industry newsletter about like stores or chains or etc. that might be in danger.
Interesting.
It's really weird and ghoulish in some ways, but that's that industry. They're built to take on other people's debts for profit. And we sort of saw this idea of big is not the way of the future. And you can kind of look out now and you can see all of the bigger a structure is, the harder it is to manage, not just because of COVID, but just in general. And the COVID stuff has sort of accelerated all this. So it was the delivery stuff. It was when we kind of were in a good place, when we were like, okay, so do we hire another employee right now, or do we spend that money on having a really good website built? And we decided to get the really good website built because if we have that channel as well, then the extra person becomes more doable because of that added structure.
Right.
So staying as small as possible while doing as much as you can without, harming the other resources that people don't count on, because a business runs on money, time, and emotion and personal reserves.
I mean, that makes total sense, because it's like if you build up that website, and your website is really nice, and you have the shopping mechanic to it, so that makes ordering from a distance all the more. I mean, mail order. That's another big part of what's happened during the pandemic is there's been like a building upon that. But if you have those structures set up, that makes hiring an employee in a sustainable fashion much more possible. But
Absolutely.
I do think one thing that's really, and I'm not going to name names with this. I was talking to a retailer not that long ago, and they were telling me about, like, did you know that this one shop that has like a bunch of different shops does not even have a website? And when I heard that, it like blew my mind. But I mean, I think that's one of the things that's interesting about comic shops is so often they're built off of the identity of the owners, and they're built off of how they kind of view the way that comic shops should work. It's like their own idealized version of that. There's like no one size fits all to it. And I thought that was deeply fascinating. Also, it seems like a really bad business model, but that's just me. I did want to mention, I did want to ask about like the pathway to that launch. Like, how long was when you first came up with the idea, when you're thinking about, I want to launch a shop, what was the time frame between idea and launch?
So a lot of people who have started stores are going to go, that is horrifying.
45 days.
You're not too far off.
Oh my God.
So I had quit my job as of October, gave them till the end of December. My freelance stuff fell through mid-January. And
wow, and you launched in May? Oh my God.
And that was the grand opening and not the opening.
What? So you like launched in April?
Yeah.
So 3 months.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a thing that I don't recommend. It's things you learn as you're kind of going. But it was part of things falling into place as they were. We wanted to see if we could do it for Free Comic Book Day, because we figured like it's essentially the way that the media approaches Free Comic Book Day, free advertising for your opening launch. And if we couldn't do it this year, it was probably going to be the next year.
Right.
And it ended up being things lined up. And I can't stress that enough, because we learned so much in terms of how specific you have to be when starting a business, including when you tell the people who are renovating your space, all right, we want the Ethernet cables to run through to these spots. You also have to be specific enough to say, and you also need to terminate the ends so that we can actually plug those cords into something.
That seems important.
You wouldn't think you would need to, because why would I want these cords to run through if they don't actually connect to anything?
Mm-hmm.
But you do have to do that.
Yeah.
Little things like that. And so it was like, that was our big lesson early on, is just, you cannot trust other people's motivations or their care that it matters to you in terms of your business and what that means. Mm-hmm. It's a little cold, but it's honestly one of those things that you just kind of end up dealing with and adjusting your timeframes for.
Yeah. This reminds me of when my wife and I bought our house, and we had this whole, we had heard so many horror stories like, oh, be prepared to put in like 10 offers and like maybe you'll get one of them accepted. Then you'll eventually get the house, or prepare to like have this long process. We weren't even looking for a house. There was this house that had an open house, like basically right across the street from us. Mm-hmm. And it was really nice. It had just been totally like renovated and everything like that. So we went to the open house strictly. Well, there was two reasons. My wife wanted to check it out because she's an architect. And also we had just watched an episode of Sleepy Hollow in which the two main characters went to an open house and there was free baked goods. And I was convinced I would get free baked goods if I went.
Awesome.
And so we went there. There were no baked goods, but we ended up buying the house. And it was like literally basically 30 days to the day of that, visit. We ended up acquiring the house. And the wild thing about it is like, we kind of like had to stop telling that story to people because people were so like upset that it was so fast for us and that it didn't require us like putting in a bunch of offers and looking at a bunch of different houses. We looked at one house and now we live in it. And it is, I imagine that's like kind of your comic book story. It's like, I need to just stop telling this story because people will be like, what the hell? How did it work like that?
whatever form it takes, karma is a real force in the world. So there was that end of it. But within a year and a half, the business partner that we had partnered up with, who was doing like gaming and stuff, he's actually still in our original location. We weren't really seeing eye to eye, which is the most judicious way to describe that relationship.
Uh-huh.
In a year and a half, and we moved. And that second process was a lot more harrowing.
Sure.
In terms of getting the business licensing, which the previous businesses hadn't changed the coding for that specific space. And so despite the fact that there'd been a couple retail spaces there before, it was zoned as daycare.
What?
So that actually took longer to do, because to change it, you have to have the fire inspector come in. You have to have like all this stuff happen. You have to send blueprints of your space, like this whole deal. The landlord didn't have blueprints of their space, didn't have all these things that we've discovered that you really should have on record with the city. I can say these things for several reasons, but I won't get into that. And so that process was a lot trickier, but also had to be done at a very swift pace. And so there was like this period of time that was just nightmarish. And we actually moved into this new location, just the way that we did the business split. And one of the reasons why we did this business split, because the company that I used to work for had many partners, and seeing what they went through when there was money in the business versus what we could probably do when there wasn't money in the business. Mm-hmm. It seemed like a lot easier process. I was correct about that. And so that's kind of what pulled the trigger for us. And then with kind of that new mentality going forward, like the way we split it, we moved into the new space with the rent covered and Diamond floating us for 2 weeks, and that was it in terms of reserves.
Wow.
It was essentially starting a new business with no loan, because the loan had been eaten up already. Money owing on our part of the loan, and basically being floated for 2 weeks. And our telecom company that we were trying to get things transferred with didn't actually transfer the things, even though we had been talking to them for over a month and a half. Mm-hmm. So we had no internet, so we had no debit. So we're running things through Square on our phones.
Wow.
For like a week and a half, and thinking to ourselves, we really only have 2 weeks
to make this work.
Exactly.
Yeah. This is a good time to mention that my wife and I, when we bought our house, for 2 years, we had roof problems. So maybe speed is not always the best thing.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes there might be a reason why things are happening quick.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh yeah, you know what? That sounds great. Absolutely. Done and done.
Yeah. I was just going to say, well, let's talk about, some of the things that are happening inside the store, because I am really curious. Like we've said a number of times, every shop is different. And I'm curious, because 2020 is obviously a weird year. I don't want to focus solely on that, but I'm curious as to what is working for you right now. And also really what kind of works for you in general, to kind of contextualize a little bit in terms of like, I think generally speaking, people think of like, Batman and like previously like the Walking Dead saga and et cetera, like Jonathan Hickman X-Men stuff. What's really working for you?
So for us, we're one of how I seem to view it, 2 models that seem to be working really well right now. Both are very online. Ours happens to focus more on graphic novels, and specifically all ages graphic novels, because libraries are at lesser capacity, and there's honestly way less for kids to do these days. Like, it's not a great idea to go to the park. It's not a good idea to go to indoor recreation jungles. It's not a good idea to take your kids to play dates, to all these things.
Right.
There's no summer camps. There's no et cetera. So part of it is a little bit of that captive audience And honestly, having a good curation system. Now, like the other model is basically being really good at back issues. That's never been us. And the way that I look at us is without a store that's getting these kids past Dogman, which seems dismissive. Dogman is incredible.
Well, Dogman's step one.
Dogman is step one, and it enrages me that I see so many retailers, one saying like, I don't carry Dogman because it's everywhere, and two, going like, without this, the numbers would look way different, as though that Dogman is a problem that we have.
Yeah,
it's not a problem.
The problem is not knowing what step 2 or step 3 is.
Exactly. Like, first, always carry Dogman in your store.
Right.
Yes, it is everywhere, but even having it, and this is the Walking Dead thing too. Walking Dead was everywhere. Having it in your store communicates that you know, in terms of Dogman, what kids are reading today. And then you can push them on to the next thing, because Dogman only comes out twice a year, and kids need more entertainment than something that comes out twice a year.
Are you suggesting that you should carry what people like? Because that's too radical of an idea for this podcast.
I know it's super wild.
I don't know if I can stand by and listen to this, Brandon. This is ridiculous.
It's outrageous.
Yeah. But no, I mean, you're exactly right. It's like, if they see Dogman and you're like, oh, you like Dogman, but you already have the book, then like try out X. I don't know. I'm trying to like look at my bookcases to see what would be a good example. But it's like, you know, if they age a little bit, there's like Raina, or there's like, I mean, Jen Wang, or there's all kinds of different people. That might be a little too aggressive, but you know, there's transitional ones you can work in there. Basically just anything First Second. I love First Second.
Oh, First Second's absolutely amazing. And the stuff that they're putting out and their design, oh my goodness. Between them and Random House Graphic right now. Oh yeah. Like it's a golden age for all ages graphic novels.
I just got Sloan Leong's new book from First Second in the mail. They just shipped me a copy, and the production value is fantastic. A Map to the Sun. Have you seen it yet?
It's ridiculous. We actually just received it yesterday as this recording.
It's so good. I mean, honestly, like the production value, like that's one of the things that I really nerd out about production value. And like, that's one of the things that I think means so much. It's, you know, parents want to spend money on something that's going to have some level of substance, that's not going to get like torn apart like instantaneously. And I think that having a good production value on something that young readers would like has like a intrinsic statement of value to parents.
Absolutely. You cannot discount the immediate eye, especially in terms of how parents have a time premium even more than folks without children. Right. Danica and I don't have kids, and we respect the people who do, because holy cow. We often tell people that the business is our baby and it keeps us up at night. Right. Our version of one anyways. Because it truly does, but there's of course so many different challenges, including to go anywhere and do anything, you tack on like an extra hour of prep to go out and prep once you get home, and so everything takes so much more planning. So you to have something that you can see, that immediately your brain goes, wow, that is worth its weight in gold, because it's taken out so much time of digging and looking and whatever. Mm-hmm.
No, I totally agree. Now, I am interested in, so like you said that it's a great, you know, literally, and I hate to say literally in regards to this, but it's true. Like there is a captive audience. Like people are staying inside. Kids want more to engage with. So what do you do? Like, do you actually reach out to audiences would potentially be interested, or is it a field of dreams? If you build it, they will come type situation. What do you do?
A little column A, a little column B. Right. We've discovered that the best advertising has always been word of mouth. Yeah. Kids and parents. Exactly. And once you're really hooked up with uh, it's sort of like a parent network, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Someone goes like, "Oh, this is a great place for you to take your kids to because we've got." Now, and this is more times past type of thing because it's out of commission right now. But like the coloring desk, just comfy chairs to sit in for the kids. We don't have that stuff in the adult section. You're adults, you can walk. But kids, especially when they've like grabbed something that their eyes have just been drawn to, or that their friends have told them about, or whatever, they want to experience it immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And to be able to provide the space where the parent can be like, all right, you found that thing that you want? Awesome. Sit in this chair. Please don't move. And to see them just enraptured in this object while their parents can kind of even look around the store and grab other things. It's a huge thing. And we don't do it for like specifically for business things. It's a nice side effect of just building a good space that families feel comfortable in.
Yeah. I remember the first time somebody did that really stood out. And I'm not saying they're the first to do it, but I think my relationship with the Challengers Squad, Challengers Comics and Conversation in Chicago, was founded on being super enthusiastic about them starting sidekicks. I don't know if you like the...
Oh, Challengers is amazing.
Yeah.
I've known about them since the weird Wild West days of comics podcasting when Around Comics would record there.
Wait, is that an actual podcast?
Around Comics?
I'm like, this is a terrible confession. I host a comic podcast. I listen to zero comic podcasts.
Oh, so they stopped for a good chunk of time.
Okay.
But like Scotty Young used to be a co-host.
Oh, wow.
Right. Yeah, like this is like John Suntra's era, starting podcasts. Like they were around.
Okay.
Like
literally.
iFanboy.
They were around comics. That's wild. Yeah, no,
they returned fairly recently.
Okay. Yeah, I'm terrible at comic podcasts. I listen to like one podcast, Binge Mode on the Ringer Podcast Network, and like that's it. And it's actually, it used to be 3, but it's kind of dropped since then, or since the pandemic. I think a lot of people have. I mean, based off my numbers, I can tell you that. But going back to what you were saying. So you said like online. You said online was an important part. Like, is that a big portion of what your overall sales are?
So online is kind of wild, actually. So our sales online aren't what you would say robust, but the way that we've built the site, it doesn't have even a fraction of what we have in the store. Everything on there is fairly curated to the point where you can search by genre, and then once you're in that genre, there's a tab to refine it. So if you're like, I'm looking for fantasy, but I want a horror element to it, you look at the fantasy genre, and then you can refine it to do fantasy horror books.
That's fantastic.
And we really kind of looked at it as the everything store is Amazon. You're never going to be able to compete with Amazon.
Totally.
So you should never put everything on your website. It's confusing to people who are looking to discover things. And that's kind of the way we view our stores. We're a discovery store. And so that's kind of how we've built the online. And almost because of that, we'll have people who kind of go through our online and then just walk in the door and go like, hey, do you have this?
Mm-hmm.
Or just ask us in email, which, works quite well for us, because if we do the transaction in person, there's not so much of a fee taken by, like, say, Shopify or the online credit cards or PayPal or whatever.
Yeah. Well, like connecting it to Dogman, like what you were saying earlier, it's like this is like the online store is step 1. Getting them to come into the shop is step 2.
Exactly.
That's awesome. I love that. Yeah. I mean, honestly, like I think that's one thing that a lot of businesses forget. Like, and I think that's what makes special bookstores and comic shops special, is that curated ability, that personalization, the ability, like I've been shopping in the same shop for forever. It's like, there used to be clerks that worked at my local shop who would be like, oh, you're going to love this because they know me. Like they know what my taste is. And I think that's sometimes, not every shop, but some shops kind of forget about that. There's a lot of shops that are great at, like, I love Austin Books and Comics down in Austin, and they have like they do such a good job for like setting up, sections to like highlight specific stuff. Like, if you like this, then you'll like this, et cetera, things of that sort. And I think that kind of curation is such a powerful element in the world where it's like you do have that everything store. It's like, how do you differentiate yourself? By being very specific.
Absolutely. There's this weird disconnect that I find with folks who are trying to put on this sort of front that like we are the absolute best. It's not about being the best or the biggest or the most. It's about looking at your circumstances and realizing what your strengths in comparison to, say, like an Amazon would be. So the strengths in our case are the curation, is the fact that you can go to our site and kind of navigate it fairly easy enough to find something that's perfect for you. And I remember listening to a podcast you did with the Bad Idea head guy, Dinesh.
Yeah.
And he's talking about a bit of their structure. And, you can kind of ask, like, why do you do 100 stores? Well, it's like, well, we're just this small operation of people. And so for one, it's when he was working at Valiant, it was that amount of stores that would get them X amount of sales. Like 90% of their sales came from 100 stores or something like that.
Totally.
And so going like, okay, so our resources are little. We are 4 people. I think it's 4 people. And so we're distribution. We are marketing. We are back-end production, the whole deal. So how can we turn that limitation into something marketable? Well, there's only 100 stores that it's going out to, instead of we can only get to 100 stores. Right. And of course, he didn't say that in his interview, but that's business brain in my head just being like, Well,
it's inverting the situation to make it seem desirable as opposed to making it seem like, only 100 of 2,500 shops like ordered it. It's like,
exactly.
It is really smart. I mean, that's the funny thing about Bad Idea is like, I think a lot of the stuff they do is really goofy and it's intentionally goofy, but at the same time, it's also like a lot of it is like manufacturing desirability and trying to get people to take interest in the comics they're making. It's like, there's a little bit of carny to it, but you know what? Comics have had a long history of carnies running the show. Look at Stan Lee.
Oh, 100%. Like it's comics and wrestling. It's carny business. You kind of use what you have to get people interested. And, for a company that is essentially 4 people and the freelance that they have going, how much talk are you hearing about Bad Idea and how much talk are you hearing about other companies, say of their relative size?
Yeah, that's true. There's at least on Twitter, like there's a wide mix of like genuine enthusiasm and people tweeting about them because they're subtweeting them, but at the same time, subtweets still give press.
Exactly. Like the idea I've come across over the years is just sort of like the tide you see online, say in regards to Tom King, a year ago, just like lauded, etc. Like you can't say a bad word about him. Whereas now, there's this like weird undercurrent to the discourse of him online.
Oh yeah,
and you can like look at the sales of something, say of Mr. Miracle versus Strange Adventures, and you go like, oh okay, it's like there's success here, and now because there's success here, that's when you start hearing about that's when you get the subtweets.
That's the backlash
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you can't have you can't have the backlash without the success that they come together, unfortunately. But I do want to jump on something you said, which I thought was really interesting. By far, the most surprising thing on your website, besides you being labeled as a comic sommelier, which I loved, was that you guys pay $1 a pound for back issues. And I would have never guessed in a million years that you guys would carry back issues at all. You mentioned earlier back issues being another segment that is really popular, not necessarily for you, but I was very surprised to see that.
quite honestly, it's time and processing.
Yeah.
It's super easy to pound them out in the literal sense because it's by the pound. Even though we're in Canada, it's just an easier metric for people. Um, and put them out for sale.
Yeah.
You make the money off of it. You turn it over. For us, it's always been about the reading audience. Yeah, someone's going to kind of pick up something that you might get a phenomenal deal on. Quite honestly, that's a great trade-off in terms of cash for us in exchange for feeding the market with readers.
Yeah, totally.
Without stores like us, you don't get the back issue market in the future.
Right. I mean, the funny thing about back issues is like it's interesting because there's two sides to back issues. One, there's like the people who are going through back issues so they can try to find something to make a profit off of. And then there's also like I grew up, I mean, granted this was before trades were really prevalent, but I grew up reading like grab bags full of back issues, and it was like reading these random collection of comics that made me become the comic fan I was. And it's like you're saying, it does in a weird way. It's like if a kid can come in and get 10 comics for like $250, that's an investment in the future.
Absolutely. Like we all remember being a kid and going to the store and like the asterisks of course with any situation like this is there's exceptions to the rules, but by and large, you're a kid and you have $10 and there's this deal. There's this bin where you can get 10 comics for $10.
Yeah.
Or you can get 2 new comics that you might really, really, really want for $10.
Right.
9 times out of 10, that kid is going to be like, I'm going to get 10 comics.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what they are. I got 10 of them, and now I've got 10 instead of 2.
They don't care if Punchline's in there. They'll just read Harley Quinn comics. They'll be cool with that.
They'll come back because they got part 12.
It's always
and they're
part
like,
12.
Hey, exactly. Like, where's the rest of this?
Yeah.
Like, I don't understand what's going on, but I love it.
Right. I don't know. I'm a big. I actually like. I know this is impossible to recreate. Like sometimes I know it's a bad thing that comics can be hard to get into, but I do sometimes think that sometimes we forget that getting lost in it is part of the magic of comics.
Absolutely.
I grew up on 90s X-Men, so that was just purely getting lost in it.
My introduction to Spider-Man, the first comics that I ever paid for.
Clone Wars.
Yep.
Or Clone Saga, sorry.
Clone Saga. Heck yeah. See, I always know you do your research. That's awesome.
Well, no, that was just, honestly, that was just logic. I just figured if we're going to be talking about a weird place to start, nothing tops Clone Saga.
Yeah, like, and I bought the omnibuses.
I didn't even. I mean, I know it makes sense that they made an omnibus for that, but I'm still slightly surprised. Is there an Onslaught omnibus?
You know what? I don't think there is. I might actually be wrong about that because that wasn't my particular jam. Spider-Man was my guy.
Oh yeah, sure.
But like Ben Reilly was my first Spider-Man.
There you go.
And so I've got the first 2 the 2 Clone Saga omnibuses. And the first Ben Reilly omnibus, because there's going to be another one coming out. And I'm waiting for it because, like, reading through them, they're not good comics. Not even remotely. But they're so much fun. And that's another thing that people forget is things don't necessarily have to be good. They can be fun.
Yeah, totally.
And that's super important to me and super important to like how we approach things in the store. One of the things that I hate the most, and it actually happened within this week, was this parent berating their kids for holding up a comic, being like, I want this one, and being like, no, you don't. And like, yes, they do.
Why was it like inappropriate for them or something?
No.
Oh.
It's just because it's not what the parent thought they wanted. And no, there's definitely the case where, you know, the parent absolutely knows, like, in the situation that the kid's not really gonna key into it. But the way these children were trying to convince their parent, children are so pure. they love uh, without bias. They approach life with just this verve, and I love it so much because they can approach a comic, and this is like a Grant Morrison thing from one of the San Diego Comic Cons, where he talks about like children understand the difference between reality and fiction. Children approach these comic book tales, these fictional tales, and go, that person flies, awesome, let's go with this.
Mm-hmm.
And an adult approaches, this person can fly, how?
Yeah.
How doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's about having fun in these stories and experiencing them. And when people say that children don't know reality from fiction, no, adults don't know reality from fiction. They've forgotten to have fun, and they've forgotten to say, yes, let's do this. And to see that in the store, like, that's the thing that hurts me the most.
Yeah. So this is one thing for me. I'm like totally on the Grant Morrison side of things, because I think one of the things, like, I don't know if this is a scarlet letter or what, but I don't care about continuity. If it doesn't fit with something, I don't care. Does it fit with the story? Yes, then I'm cool with it. Mm-hmm. Like Squirrel Girl, amazing comic. One of my favorite comics of the past decade. Yep. Does some of it like fit perfectly with every facet of characterization for every character ever? No, but I don't care. You know what's awesome? Craven in that book. Who gives a crap if he matches how Craven normally is, where he's like sitting and brooding and having a battle, or like war with his children who have to decide who's the best version of his child so they can replace him or whatever. And it's just like, I don't care. I just like, I want to have a good, fun comic, and Squirrel Girl was amazing. But, so I did want to ask about, we talked about how all ages comics work for you, how online works for you. So most of the conversation in the direct market is typically around single issue comics. It's around your dark metals, your, God, did I get that right? Death metal. Shit. I always mix it up. It's like Dark Knights, death metal, et cetera, et cetera. It just get lost in there. Anyways, you have your Empires, you have your Ten of Swords coming up. You have things like that. What's are you having a lot of interest in single issues right now? Because I've heard really positive things amongst a lot of shops. What are you seeing on that side? Good or bad?
Good. There's a lot more single issue interest. We've very recently actually moved to, because of how DC popped out to different distribution, which I am a big fan of. We actually moved from Diamond's pull box system to Managed Comics, and have been using that to communicate with our customers about final order cutoffs and etc. to amazing effect. Now that's part and parcel with people being really interested in single issues, I think, because there's less on the stands.
Totally.
People, there's some stores complaining that there's not enough product out there. I think that's the opposite. If you're dealing with people who buy volume just to buy volume, a person's not going to love every book that they buy if they're buying volume. And I think there's a lot of stores that kind of have that mentality, that have curated the customers in that mentality, that are having problems just because, yes, there is less. But, you know, like the true future of the industry is the people connecting with these books. And these days, what's coming out is what a publisher even truly believes in. Mm-hmm. There's a bunch of things cut. Part of it's just because of how it was selling, but part of it is just because they were putting it out to put it out.
Right.
And that change where you see every book that, say, like a Marvel or DC is putting out has a specific purpose, either in terms of we need this for the overarching story, or you know, it's just like a good idea to sell monetarily, whatever. It has a good answer to the question, why is this coming out? Like that's changed a lot in terms of single issues for us. But at the same term, when single issues weren't coming out, we discovered that and we did the math, even going back a few years, if single issues stopped coming out, we'd be able to pay all our bills still, because we're not paying the single issue bills.
Well, and then beyond that too, it's like if like, let's say theoretically single issues did go away and they were just going straight graphic novels, that audience would shift. Like a lot of it's not like single issue buyers wouldn't necessarily universally not buy comics anymore. A lot of them would just start buying graphic novels instead. I mean, look at perfect example, Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips. Are fans of Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips going to stop buying comics because Reckless is a graphic novel? Nope. They are not. They are going to buy that, and they're going to be very happy buying that. And I think that's the whole thing. But I do think it's so. One caveat I have about what you were saying about how some shops are like there needs to be more comics. I think that what they really mean, and this is just my take, is that what they really mean, if they really got analytical about it, is it's not that there needs to be more comics overall. It's that Marvel has been really slow, and when Marvel's really slow, their overall sales drop because Marvel pulls a lot of weight for people, and they were really slow coming back during the pandemic.
Yeah, I did my weird business math on that one, and you can kind of like track the only companies that really didn't slow during the pandemic were either small enough or DC and Image. Whereas Image, you can't tell a small creator that, no, sorry, your book needs to be on hold.
Right. In
their business structure. That's just it might even be borderline illegal.
Right.
To be like, no, this contract, no, you need to hold off on your product specifically, but this person can. And DC, which went outside and sort of forced Diamond's hand. I truly believe that Diamond, especially when you kind of math out when the repayment plan was going to kind of match up and take effect, and where they thought they'd be at more of a full capacity, basically told people, this is how many titles that you can come out with. This is what we can handle during this time. And that's why that week that all those terrible Marvel Wednesday variants came out was the week that there was a lot of big books coming out in more of a full-looking line than what was before. It was that specific week where Diamond would have been, say, caught up, that they weren't doing back pay, that they weren't whatever, so that they can when the books were kind of coming out past them, they could afford it.
Interesting. When you look at it and you think in the context of Free Comic Book Summer, that's like pretty much right the same time when Marvel picked up again too. So I wonder, I'm not saying you're right, I'm not saying you're wrong, I'm just saying I wonder
and
how
I
much
don't even know.
I wonder how much of that is true. I will say that like I have been pleased by Marvel like kind of slow playing it, because they're not exactly big on not rolling deep when it comes to comics. I mean, they generally speaking, I mean, for the first 3 months of the year, they were probably releasing like 30% more comics than any other publisher.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like them actually slow rolling it and seeming like cautious or like maybe thoughtful in the pandemic was like kind of genuinely shocking. If anybody was going to go to alternative distributors, I would have bet it was going to be Marvel, but it's how it worked. Now I have to bring this up just because it just happened. You mentioned DC. Do you have, what's your concern about the DC situation with all the layoffs this week? Jim Lee, I don't know if you read the Jim Lee interview that went up on Variety today. Mm-hmm. Does that how does that affect your thinking for anything? Does it just like, it is what it is and it's not really your primary market, so it doesn't matter? Or does that feel like a moment?
First and foremost, it always sucks when great people in this industry are losing their jobs.
Absolutely.
I don't care for that specifically. In terms of business stuff, between COVID and the fact that, say, a company like AT&T might look at the structure of Marvel and how bare bones they are and how they were always putting out more content than DC, could look at DC's structure and go, wow, there's way too much here. So I see that in terms of the business logic of the situation as horrible as it is. Like, given my druthers, I would keep so many of those people at DC. And I truly hope, especially that Mark Doyle and Andy Curry have jobs coming out of this. 'Cause they were captains of some of the best product that that company was putting out in terms of quality.
Oh yeah, I mean they were the Black Label guys, and I love like so much of Black Label. I mean
Yeah, exactly.
a fair amount, but yeah, no, it's interesting because it naturally it leads to so much doom and gloom and like infinity YouTubers putting out videos about how like comics are dead and they're going to be dead forever and yada yada yada. But I don't know. It's such an odd situation. It's like I don't. There's so much hypothesizing about
Mhm.
what's going on, and I just like I don't even think people inside DC or Warner or excuse me, whatever you call them, Warner Media, AT&T,
Yeah.
they if they were had a gun to their head and they had to say what was happening next, it would be a guess.
Yep. The fact of the matter is, in terms of the money made by DC Comics, um, DC Comics is a rounding error, and that's even before their costs for production. Like, um, it's a situation where it was everywhere in that company
Hmm.
lost that chunk of people, and I know the probably the direction of who got cut was directed by the folks immediately in charge of DC at the moment.
Hmm.
Um, but sort of the why is just a larger COVID happened,
Yeah.
and business has changed in general for print media for a long time, and DC's actually had a robust structure despite that.
Hmm.
Um, so like it sucks in general, but and another thing I want to say too. Now part of this is of course my fault, but a lot of people think that I want the single issue comic to go away. That's not necessarily true. We would be fine if it went away. Uh, but like the single issue is how I got into comics
Yeah.
is very important to me. I just kind of look at it as a business standpoint, and there's going to be a point in the future, soon or not. I don't think soon because there's still money in Batman.
Right.
Um, that the single issue either needs to change, or the bigger companies are going to abandon it in terms of print.
Hmm.
And that's just a business uh, uh, business brain thing instead of like a what I want in my heart.
Yeah. I mean, I'm right there with you. I mean, a lot of times people take what you say about like business related stuff as like that's your opinion or something like that. And I can tell you what, if you think I'm rooting at single issues, you should look directly to my right while I record my podcast because there are a lot of long boxes there, and I get a lot of single issues every single week. But at the same time, it's just like I do think that there's a shift going on, and I think, and I'm a believer that there's space for kind of all of these things. There's space for single issues. There's space for a more robust digital platform. I think there's space for shops doing more with graphic novels. I think there's space for all of this, and it's just like there's maybe like the slider is going to go up on some and go down on others, but I don't know. I mean, it's very strange. But, I do want to just a couple more questions. I did want to ask, like we talked about what is working. We talked about how single issues are going well. Is there anything that isn't working or perhaps is surprising, like amongst like currently, what everything that's going on in comics, in variant edition?
Uh,
I guess like,
this,
like what's not working that might surprise people, because I kind of feel like people have an idea. Like sometimes it's like you attach your own personal feelings towards comics and say that it's a success when maybe it isn't necessarily. Is there anything that's not really working that might surprise me?
um, I don't personally think so, but that's just sort of my own brain space. The DC solicits just came out as we're recording this for November, and there's a lot of final issues in there. Um, the and everyone goes like, well, this is how it ends, and the idea that an ongoing series right now is what the industry wants seems to be very surprising to me, because it's the ongoing series that by and large other than, I would say, the Immortal Hulk and Batman. People could care less, more or less. They're buying most of the ongoings out of inertia.
Mm-hmm.
There's no growth on any of those, and that's actually been industry standard for forever. There was a site by a bunch of Vertigo creators a few years back called Standard Attrition, just as a joke off of the what would be posted on the sales charts on the beat for Vertigo books. And it because there'd be like, again, literally a standard attrition on these books. Ongoings aren't what people have connected with forever. They're connecting with the new thing. And that's why kind of books lose sales unless it's particularly phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why you're seeing these days. So Batman Catwoman, if and when it happens, is a 12-issue miniseries. Strange Adventures, Rorschach, but that's just Tom King.
Right.
But even beyond that, like, look at the new books being announced. And by and large, they are shorter term ideas, whether they're announced as such or have been told, like, you've got 12 issues for sure. You've got 5 issues for sure.
Mm-hmm. I remember when
make this that story. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I remember when miniseries used to be like a Scarlet Letter. And now
right?
It's like completely shifted. And I think it's in a weird way, it's kind of like fits what the, going back to what Brubaker and Phillips did. It's like a lot of people want a complete story these days.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have like a 6, like, it's a really fun book that I'm absolutely astonished by, Empire X-Men, different writers, every single issue. It ties into an event. It's completely insane. It's really fun. And
it's amazing.
Yeah, I love it. And it's like, it's 4 issues. Bam. That's it. There's like part of me that wishes that what they did with the Dawn of X stuff is, instead of making a bunch of ongoings, just have a series of miniseries. And like have, especially given the structure. I mean, like, I actually think that personally, as far as I'm concerned, I think the flagship X-Men book is about as perfect of an ongoing as you can ask for, because every single issue is a jumping on point and a jumping off point. But it's like, you don't have to read previous issues. You can read the 4th issue and read Apocalypse and Magneto and Xavier having dinner with diplomats and making very intense like political statements and stuff like that. And you don't have to read the other issues. It just works. You can read any of it. And I think that a lot of this, I think part of the reason why miniseries are so appealing now is it used to be perceived that they were lesser, that they were secondary. But now I think it's almost starting to shift to being they're accessible. And that's interesting.
Absolutely. And I think also a secret, because like Marvel always plays it like this.
Stealth
I
minis.
Think I think the secret success, even especially of the X line, is all of those books have a specific purpose. And I am 100% sure that when that purpose is fulfilled, that book ends. They're using the old vernacular because Marvel, I feel personally, hasn't adjusted to kind of the new ideas that are happening right now. They're using the old vernacular of tell the retailer that it's an ongoing, because otherwise they won't order it as much.
Right. Well, and I think the interesting thing too, and like this, I'm not going to name names. I'm not going to, pin anything on anybody, but I do think it's interesting that the books that most in that X-Men line, the books that don't have the most obvious mission are the ones that connect the worst, and the ones that do seem to connect the most. Like a great example, X Factor was awesome. X Factor number 1 was so perfect, and it was so like on point for actually having a reason to exist in this line. And I think that's completely necessary. Honestly, like that's one of the things that I've been on for a number of years. And this is not me besmirching Image, but for a long time, it was like when I would see like new books announced, I was like, I don't know who this is for. And I'm not saying like that gets into some of the art and commerce overlap. It's like, you don't want to just make it about like, you want an audience for this, but you also want to be realistic about it. And that's tough. It's really interesting when, I don't know. It's like, sometimes it's like, you got to remember that these titles should have like an audience or a purpose. And I know that's a terrible thing to say to some, but it's kind of true.
That is true. My take on anything that I'm looking to purchase, because there's some books that I absolutely love. One of my favorite books of all time is Casanova. It is, despite my love, almost virtually unsellable.
I bought it.
Yeah, but what's your simple pitch for it?
Oh, there's no simple pitch.
Exactly.
What if James Bond wasn't like I don't even know. Is interdimensional right? Correct?
My best pitch for it is the last panels of, depending on what release it is, Casanova 7 or the 4th issue of the Avaricia, I think the first arc. The ending where there's the 3 characters in wedding dresses, and it's this page where there's this big fight in a giant robot, and there's like all these things happening, and there's these panels that are just scratched out. One of the lines even includes, "It's a nice day for a fight wedding." But the last one that's not scratched out says, "I love comics." And that's what that book is actually about. But unfortunately, to pitch that book to somebody, that is one of what I would consider an extremely weirdly inside baseball comic, because it is a comic book about loving comics. And without that already as your core, you cannot start a person on Casanova. You just can't.
Right. Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah. So anything else to sell the book, personally, and even just in a larger industry, a publisher, a retailer has to always ask themselves, why is this book coming out? What is that answer for you? And what do you think that answer is for people? That answer will tell you who exactly to sell it to and whether or not it will sell.
Yeah. I mean, to bring it back to all ages, I think that, when people talk about why like all ages stuff has become such a phenomenal success in comics, I think there's a number of things to it. I think that one underrated part about it is it's a lot, like, given that most of these are complete stories, it's easier to promote it because you're not trying to promote something repeatedly. You're trying to sell it once. That makes it easier. But the other thing is so many of those stories are so much easier to pitch. Like, I remember there was this interesting article Shannon Hale wrote that was about boys comics versus girls comics, and the idea, or boys stories versus girls stories, and the idea that a boy shouldn't read a girl's story or something like that. My thing for, like, for example, Smile by Raina Telgemeier is like, do you have teeth? Then you will find this relatable. Mm-hmm. And it's like, it turns out, Brandon, that a lot of people have teeth. So,
a vast majority of them, yeah.
Yes, exactly. I mean, there's markets, there's pockets that don't fit that, but at the same time, it's I just think that that's one of the secret sauces of a lot of those books, is that it's really easy to pitch someone on like Amulet or Bone or Smile or even Dogman. I mean, and they're like. It helps a lot that they're all great comics too. I mean, like I'm like literally surrounded by Kazu Kibuishi art. Like, that dude is a genius. So
amazing.
Yeah.
My mother-in-law runs a kind of Asimov style sci-fi anthology series. Has done so for a few decades now, called Onspec, and they actually got fairly early in his career a Kazu Kibuishi cover, and like. That was when I kind of was looking through her archives. I was like, I'm sorry, what is this?
That's the funny thing is like, you read one of his comics and people think that like the way that he tells the story in like Amulet or in like, Daisy Cutter or in Copper or whatever is like just what he is. But like you look at those splash pages where he's establishing locations, or you look at some of his covers for Flight, that dude is a straight up boss artist. I mean, unbelievable. I mean, it's like, just like with Dav Pilkey's stuff, it's like people look at Dav Pilkey's and in Dogman and stuff, and they're like, oh, his art is rudimentary. I'm like, he's doing it because it fits the story. It's not because he is incapable of drawing differently than that. And I think that's one of the weird things is like, I don't know. I always have a beef with people kind of diminishing all ages comics because of style choices. It's like, they're actually really smart for making those style choices. They're trying to speak to their audience. That's a good thing.
Yeah, like the Dogman follows sort of like the axe cop kind of mentality. That's where I actually kind of like came across it, is that uh, as an adult, Dave Pilkey has this ability to say why not instead of why.
Right.
Dogman is, a dog and a cop were in an accident, and so they just sew together the parts that were working still, and now there's a cop who is a dog. Like, that's how it goes. That's it.
That's actually the plot.
Yeah.
I had no idea. I mean, I haven't read it, to be honest, but I mean, like, it kind of makes me want to read it because that's madness. I love it.
Yeah. And there's no further thought to it. It is not asking you why. It's saying, why not?
Yeah. I mean, it goes back to what you were saying with Grant Morrison.
Yeah. The answer to the question is just because it's fun.
Yeah, totally. I like fun. Okay. So we're going to close with something that has nothing to do with comics, which is very fun. I came across something that is deeply interesting to me. Mm-hmm. You were a presenter at 2015's Edmonton International Cat Festival.
Yes, that is true.
Tell me everything. It's not even a question. Just tell me everything. How did that happen? Why did that happen? I love it. Was it amazing?
Yes. The Cat Festival was actually like fairly big for the city, honestly. They would get cat celebrities. So, yeah. And so, and they still did up until like obviously now it's not happening because of the COVID stuff. But it kind of happened because Danica and I have had a love of cats, and in a previous version of the site, the people listed as running the store, and it's something actually we continue on our social media, is ourselves and our interns, which are our cats. Any pet that comes into the store, any pets that are shared with the store are official store interns, and are in charge of nap reserves, which are very important because we can't sleep a lot, so they kind of store that for us, and things like that. So anyways, it kind of came about a little bit because of that kind of thing, and I was asked to present a presentation about cats in pop culture and why they seem to be so prevalent, and kind of the two different styles, basically, kind of like the more sarcastic trickster and the helper, like usually both sarcastic, but just sort of the hows and whys of that. And yeah, it was amazing. It was a lot of fun. I also learned a lot just kind of hanging out there, because they have like cat behaviorists there. So like something that I like to impart to people who might not like cats. There's a reason why if a cat comes into a room, they go directly to you, the person who does not like the cats. It's because cats do not like eye contact or attention from strangers. Mm-hmm. And you are the only person not trying to coax them to you.
That is absolutely correct.
Participate.
Participate.
As though, yeah, exactly.
I was just gonna say, as a person who owns two cats, like, I find this to be deeply fascinating. I also happen to have watched a documentary about the cat show circuit in Canada that is on Netflix called Catwalk, and I don't know. I find the whole world, I mean, not that a festival is necessarily the cat show. I'm sure that there is an element to that to a certain degree. But I have watched, let's just say, Brandon, I've watched more documentaries about cats than would probably be advisable, but it's also very entertaining. There's this one, I don't know if you saw it. It's a Turkish one. It's set in Istanbul, and it's a documentary about street cats in Istanbul, which apparently are extremely prevalent. It's called Kedi or Kedi. It's Kedi. It was actually nominated for, I'm pretty sure, the best documentary Oscar, and it is absolutely fantastic. If you haven't seen it, you should watch it as a fellow cat lover.
Yeah, like I absolutely haven't. And honestly, we've had booths at cat shows.
Oh my God.
And it's our mentality of, so like there's a comic show that sets up in the city. It's weird to charge people to look at a worse version of our store. Mm-hmm. However, it is not weird to go to different places and get people who might not know they're into comics.
Yeah. Get them to read Junji Ito's Cat Diary.
Right? With his terrifying faces.
Oh my God. Have you read that?
Yes, I have.
It's amazing. It's also like deeply weird at times, and then it's like tragic at the end, and I'm just like, this is too much emotion for me, Junji. Calm down.
Yeah, and there's a ridiculous amount of comics that feature cats, like just an astounding amount.
It really is. There really are. But anyways, well, thank you for sharing that. Brandon, that is all I have for you. I appreciate you taking the time to talk about the history of Variant Edition, about what's going on with you right now, and also cats, because why not? Thanks for taking the time.
Absolutely. No problem.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with retailer Brandon Schatz. You can find him on Twitter at SoupyToasterson, on Variant Edition's website at variantedmonton.com, and in his shop, Variant Edition in Edmonton, Alberta. As a heads up, Off Panel is once again brought to you by Sketch.com. Check out the new version of the site and consider subscribing for access to all of the site's content and its members-only forum. If you're a fan of Off Panel, make sure to check it out on Patreon. If you back the show on there, you not only support it, but you get early access to each week's podcast, access to weekly content, and more. Also, don't forget to subscribe to Off Panel on iTunes or Spotify and give the show a rating or review while you're at it. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by liking it on Facebook at /Sketched, that's SKTCHD. Following on Twitter and Instagram at @SketchComic, or following me at @SliceFriedGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including SB, Antonio Hoffen, Nick Bennett, Daniel Whitfield, Scotty Young, Susanna Polo, Jeff Weira, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, AbductedTheComic.com, Andrew Carita, Matt Mahoney, Charlie Chu, Stefan Hall, Pensacola Pop Comics, Kim Eslin, Philip Myra, Christian Shelton, Kenny Porter, Chris Petrolo, Torrin Grunbeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Carl Mizell, Danny Ollie, Paul Slade, Akil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Liana Kingus, Keegan Ray, Milton Lawson, Wesley Gift, Sean Kirkham, Harry Small, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Ryanwan, Vita Ayala, Tara Ferguson, Dave Slusher, WMQ Comics, Akil Kokachi, Phil White, Sean Pinello, Ken Heidelman, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, Nick Michelin, David Kelly, Rob Wilson IV, Nick Polito, Owen McCready, Brendan Fletcher, Gary Maloney, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Adam Bogart, Xavier Files, Matthew Taylor, Tyler Turner, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Braldy, at Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Cheng, Benjamin Shipper, Carl McMahon, Chris Palmer, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Greg Rucka, Adam Highfield, Fiona Staples, Chris O'Halloran, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, Mission Comics Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.